So today we have, okay, here we go. Gracy Obuchowicz.
That was great.
She has such a cool last name. And I was like, I read it a million times, but having to say it out loud, that's pretty intimidating. And I stumbled upon you, I'll be honest, on her blog, because one of the things that as a health coach, I'm super interested in is self-care. And just in the process of learning about it, I kind of fell in love with your philosophy and your mindset. So Gracy's going to talk to us today about self-care, and I'm sure she has so many awesome things to say about it. But if you could first just kind of tell us what you do. How did you make self-care a profession? What are you doing?
Well, thanks for having me here, Gretchen. I love talking about self-care, so it's a real honor to just be able to take an hour in the morning to talk about self-care. I got into self-care through yoga, and I always start by saying, like, I grew up in a family where self-care was not practiced. It was like a very codependent, addicted, depressed, like you name it, like that was going on in my family. And like what I learned growing up is that if I just kind of made sure everyone else was okay and not getting upset or not going into a bad place, that I would be okay. And, with all like adaptive tendencies, that kind of works until it doesn't work anymore. And so as I got older and into my 20s, I just remember looking around and seeing where I was struggling in relationships and struggling in my own self-esteem and being like, not everybody does this. But I didn't know how to get there or what that meant. But I just saw that that wasn't the only way to live. And I felt really frustrated by that. And I did the Peace Corps after college. And when I came back from the Peace Corps, I was just in a really rough place of like not having lived in the States for a couple of years. My mom had sold the family home that I grew up in and moved to China in the meantime. So my family wasn't really there. And I was really depressed and just struggling. I didn't really want to be like applying for nonprofit jobs in these really uncomfortable shoes. And so I started going to yoga, which I'd always like kind of gone to yoga or kind of had a yoga like affinity. But I started to go every day after work. I got like the monthly pass, and there was just something about being in those rooms where I was like, I feel so much better. And I was like, whatever it is that I've been looking for, like this is the right direction. And my process, that was about 10 years ago, became a yoga instructor the next year, and taught yoga in Washington, D.C. area for about 7 years exclusively. I was doing photography and I was teaching yoga and started to lead yoga retreats. And I noticed when we were on these retreats, there was something really transformational that happened. I got really interested in Ayurveda. So I was kind of collecting all these pieces over the years. And when I was studying Ayurveda, the woman who was teaching it to me was also a business coach. And at that time, I was living with somebody, thought I would get married to him. We got the dog, the apartment. And then right before we got to that point, we just looked at each other and said, I don't think this is right. And we both felt it. And so I went from kind of thinking I had this one path of like having another person to support me to like not having a path. And this woman came into my life at the right time, and she said, you could teach people Ayurveda, because it was so transformational for me because Ayurveda was keeping me steady. So she taught me how to teach these 10-week group courses where I would bring a group of people, which I already knew was really effective from the retreats. I would teach them Ayurveda and yoga, like not the stuff on the mat, but the stuff that you do when you wake up in the morning and when you go to bed at night.
The real yoga, what I like to say.
Yeah, totally. The harder yoga to like really maintain. And then I'll just finish that answer by saying that right as I was like, okay, I'm going to teach this to people, I feel like so bolstered that I went through this big breakup. I didn't fall apart because I had the self-care. My father got leukemia. And it was very unexpected. And he ended up passing away after about 8 months. And it was, as anyone who's ever gone through a family illness like that, very, very hard and very sad and oddly joyful in places too, just like a big human experience. But I just noticed that when I would do the self-care, wake up in the morning, scrape my tongue, do a little yoga, go to bed early at night, eat regular meals, I was like able to show up for my family. And I saw that at the end of all of that, I was like, I think I've had this idea that self-care is selfish. And I don't think it is. I think it's like the way that we serve other people. So it's all evolved from that place.
So cool. And just kind of a really quick, because I'm a yoga instructor and I'm familiar with Ayurveda. Can you do just a quick, like, dummy's guide to what is Ayurveda in case people are like, what is this thing she's talking about?
Yes. Well, I think Ayurveda is one of those things that 25 years ago, people were like, what is this yoga thing people are talking about? And now everyone knows what yoga is.
Right.
I think Ayurveda is that. I think we're starting to be like, what is this thing? But basically it is the sister science to yoga. It's over, the oldest written documents are actually Ayurvedic texts in Sanskrit. It's over 5,000 years old, first documented. And it's a system of self-care that is about attuning to your own constitutional needs, that not every person is the same. It's about being able to modify those needs throughout the periods of your life, the change of seasons throughout the year, the change of hours throughout the day, but understanding that like there is this change to everything and being able to embrace that and like add balance to whatever kind of is feeling a little off balance is a way to achieve like a really deep state of health.
Very good. Yeah, and something that I've noticed just kind of being in the health and wellness industry for so long, how things start to cycle, it's really kind of interesting to me because the way that nutrition is cycling as far as trend right now is starting to really kind of align with those Ayurvedic teachings of digestion and health. And basically, who are you? What's your body? What is your body like? What is your body not like? What is going to feed you and make you function fully? I think that's so interesting how you're saying this is a trend coming around. People are going to know what it is because we're kind of doing it, but we're not saying we're doing it. I don't know.
Yeah. And I think such a huge part of Ayurveda is about listening to yourself. Mm-hmm. And I think that I've received from the health industry a lot is like, this is what you should do. Drink this many glasses of water. Don't eat carbs. Don't eat after this hour. And it's a lot of outside rules, which sometimes can be helpful if they actually work for you. But nothing on that was like, well, how does that make you feel? Mm-hmm. And when I practice Ayurveda, it's like, okay, I just had like, a big dinner. Like, how do I feel when I sleep that night? It's a lot of trial and error. And sometimes things work for me. I just, I have a 1-year-old, so I've been through 2 years of pregnancy and postpartum, and my self-care changed so much. Yeah. And it's humbling, and it's really wonderful to see like certain things worked for me in that period that didn't work for me before I was pregnant.
100%. Even now, some things I'm like, okay, my body definitely did not used to feel this way. And now, who knows? But so interesting. I always get a little off topic, just so you know.
I love it. The tangents are always the most interesting pieces for me.
Yes. Exactly. So one thing that I've noticed when trying to help people realize what self-care is, a lot of times people confuse self-care with a reward system, So if you could define self-care, what is that? What does that look like? Or just the definition to you?
Such a good question because people use that term so broadly.
They do.
And I think it has a really broad context of like bringing some attention to something you're doing for yourself. But in terms of self-care, I think the place where a lot of us get really confused, especially around the treats idea, is the difference between self-care and numbing. And so numbing being like, I'm really overstimulated in my life, I'm overwhelmed, and I need to turn the volume down on all of that. So I'm going to like sit in front of the TV for a couple of hours or drink a few glasses of wine or eat a lot of food, whatever it is that you do. Or sometimes for people, it's relationships. I'm going to kind of get into a big fight with my partner or call the person I know I shouldn't be calling right now. And I always say there's nothing wrong with numbing. We're always going to numb. It's like an essential part of life, but it's really important not to confuse it with self-care. And the metric that I use to distinguish the two is that self-care is something you wake up the next morning and feel really good about. And numbing is something that you don't feel good about.
I like it. So no regret in self-care. Yeah, perfect.
Yeah, it bolsters you. And numbing is something that it does take energy away from you. And self-care is something that gives you energy. Yeah. And the hard part is in the moment, it feels like the same thing. Where you're like, yes, I'm overwhelmed. I could just sit in front of the TV and that feels like self-care. Or I could like go like light some candles and stretch a little bit. And that feels a little harder to do sometimes than the numbing, but like the doing the stretching and the candles will actually make you probably wake up feeling a little bit better.
And I like too that you said, it's a human experience. We will do some numbing, like, no judgment on yourself, but just being really reflective. Being really reflective about, everything we've said is all about how does it make you feel. So do you, and this is just kind of an aside, do you encourage journaling to kind of figure that out or?
Yeah, I love journaling. I always just am amazed by how many secrets I keep from myself until I start to write about them.
probably why it's so hard for me to do journaling. Like, I don't want to know.
I know. And, you know, some people, just talking to people is a good way. If you have like a confidant and you can kind of like verbally journal with someone where you feel safe, that works. But something where you're putting it out in a way that like you're able to see it objectively. Because I think when it's just running around in our heads, it's really easy to like just twist it around in interesting ways. But once we see it on the page, it's like, oh, okay. And if you feel a lot of resistance to journaling, sometimes it is because there's something that kind of wants to come up. I find that for myself.
Okay, so now I need to go journal. I'll be back.
No prescriptions necessarily, but yeah, I think I've never felt bad about journaling afterwards. Like yoga class, I never feel bad.
Right. It's definitely not numbing. Yeah, for sure. So when I do that and so kind of thing, that's my segue. It's horrible, right? But when we're talking about behavior change, so this is something that when people embark on any kind of, and in my world, it's usually health and fitness related. I try to bring in all those aspects of wellness, but typically the people I see come to me for something physical. We try to unearth all the other stuff, but they come to me for something physical. And so we're having to implement behavior change. And just something that I've seen, and I used to not really teach people to learn about self-care or implement self-care, but once I started getting more intrigued by it and bringing it up to people and having them start to be reflective about how experience made them feel, I noticed that some of these behavior changes that I was teaching would stick. Is that your experience as well? And do you have any thoughts on why that is?
Yeah, it's funny. I probably wouldn't have phrased it that way, but I really think it's true, like what you're saying, that a lot of people come to me after trying a lot of different things in terms of their own like self-improvement efforts and feeling often like they've like kind of failed. And I think the number one reason people don't sign up to work with me, even if they have the interest, is because they think they're going to fail this. Mm-hmm. But I say like almost every client I've worked with has had like really life-changing effects. And that's because, like you're saying, the self-care and it's the difference that I see. The reason I think it is the difference between self-improvement and self-care. Because self-improvement is still working on that perfectionistic system of like, there's something I need to change in myself and that there's like something inherently wrong. And I think even if we kind of think it's just 5 pounds or I just need to get this job promotion, whatever it is that our kind of ego top part of our brain is telling us, like underneath it all, often it is this deeper feeling of like, something's wrong. Something's like, I need to kind of fix this thing in myself. And with self-care, what I really am very clear about teaching right away is like, you're not here to fix yourself. There's nothing wrong, but you need to care for yourself. Like if you had a child coming to you who was crying, like you wouldn't be like, you got to fix that crying. You like pick the child up and child, and we need to do that for ourselves too. That and I think once we start to feel that it's actually like, oh, it's not coming from this like flaw in our thinking actually. There's something that we need to fix, and to be like, okay, well, here I am, this is who I am, like so much self-acceptance in that. And then like, what do I need in this moment? And it just really, it's a subtle shift, but I think it shifts the whole paradigm. And I think it doesn't feel like something we need to rebel against. It doesn't feel like an oppressive system in any way. It just feels like, oh, this feels good. And I can actually modify this with the stages of my life, and it's not strict, and it's more nurturing than anything.
So cool. I love that analogy of like, what would you do to a kid who was upset, or how would you, and how would you be nurturing? Like going back to that numbing thing, would a nurturing mother, and we're both moms, we can think about, just be like, kid, here's a bottle. Well, the kid's gonna like a bottle, but is that really gonna like fulfill whatever their need is, why they're crying? But if we pick them up and hold them and cuddle them, then they'll calm down, they'll stop crying. They just want that. Yeah. Anyway, so cool. Love it.
Like the connection, right? We like want connection in those moments. Yes.
Absolutely. And that's harder and harder to get in this. I mean, we're sitting here on technology. Like, I can't give you a virtual hug. It's harder and harder to get. So I'm so glad that you have these courses. You have online courses, right? I've
done it in the past, a hybrid of online and in person. So it's been a 10-week course. I'm actually changing my whole business model. So what I'm describing is no longer available, but I've done it for 4 years, and I've taken over 200 women through this process. So it's been so powerful, but it's about 20 women who go through a course at once, and we work on like habit change and basic self-care principles, but a lot of it is about vulnerability and group support. So it's like, when I feel like I have to isolate, because that's where we really cut ourselves off from the connection, like I'm flawed, and how do I instead lean into the group and be like, I'm really struggling. And I work with like type A, high achieving Washington, DC women mostly. And it's hard for them to do that because they have this story. We all have this story, I think, in our culture that like, we're not allowed to make mistakes. We can't admit weaknesses. But to start to say like, I just need a place to tell my story, and I need a place to like, know I'm not alone. And that, I think I've learned in this work, is even more powerful than like the Ayurvedic habits, even though the habits are really helpful. And like, it's good to have routines and those things, but just knowing that we can reach out for support is such a deep layer of self-care. So we do it, we have phone calls that we did every week, an online forum, but then we would get together in person for an opening and a closing. Usually only the people that lived in Washington, D.C. would come to the opening, but I would do a weekend-long retreat for the closing. So people would come from other places that were taking the course, and those weekends were just to be with a group of women in a beautiful place with great food, and just a lot of time in circles to talk and really like share. It's so like affirming of life.
Yeah. I will say, when I realize, you read, especially online, you'll like kind of get involved in reading a person's stuff, and then you look about the person themselves. And when I saw you're in DC, I'm like, man, if that woman can get DC, like, because you're not in the woods in Vermont in a cabin somewhere, like where we think of self-care, I mean, if you can get the women in DC, like high power, like you're saying, the type A corporate style business, to want to do self-care, like, okay, this woman knows what she's talking about.
Thanks. Yeah, it's been a real trip to do that. But I have a teacher friend of mine, and he always says there's great power for you in the place that you're born. And I was born in Washington, DC. And every time, like, people meet me, they're like, you seem more California to me, or West Coast. And I'm like, nope, born and bred, like this is my place. But I feel like, especially, with all the changes that have happened in the past few years, I'm like, we need good energy in DC. And I say other places have like a brain drain, but I think we have kind of like a heart drain here in DC, that people get disheartened and they leave. And it's such a great city. And there's so much power and so much change that can happen here. So my work is to like stay here and like.
Awesome. Yeah. Doing the work in the trenches, for real. So another place, and I was we talked a little bit over email, and I loved reading the raw honesty that was on your website. It's in your diversity, equity, and inclusion statement. And first of all, you were really honest in there. You're like, hey, look, I haven't always been as inclusive as I want to be. And as teachers, sometimes that's really hard, because we want to always do everything right, but we evolve. And the way I taught yoga and the way I taught health like 10 years ago is so different. Like just in the past 2 years after having a kid, I'm like, there's so much more that needs to happen to really get where you need to be in those moments. So first of all, that was really, really cool and honest. And I just applaud you, because many people would just be like, I didn't do it right, restart, but I'm going to hide and pretend like I didn't mess up, or not be messed up, but you weren't working in the way that you want to work now. And you were just, anyway, applause for that. That was really cool.
Thank you.
So I work with a lot of moms, and we talk about self-care. We talk about like getting away, getting out of the house, but what we don't talk about a lot of times are our partners, specifically males, and their need for self-care. Talk to me a little bit about how we can be supportive of that, and what if it looks any different in men than it does in women.
This is the question. This is the question I've been wrestling with. And when I wrote that statement, that was the hardest sentence for me to write, because I just don't know what to do about men's self-care, because it's not what I've worked on. And when I was writing that, I was like, I'm here for all people. And I was like, shoot, 50% of the population I'm actually not here for, even though like in theory I'm here for it and I support men's self-care, but I'm not providing any materials. And I think it's because I'm not quite sure what they need. I have a partner who practices really great self-care. Like, I'll say that. Like, and I've been in partnerships where I don't think my partner, I felt like my habits got dragged down in past relationships. And I think in this one, for the most part, like my habits have gotten lifted up by his self-care, which is inspiring. But we got into discussions the other night around it, and like what it came back to was vulnerability. And we were talking about, Brene Brown, she's Texas.
Yes. Oh yeah. Yes.
But she tells that story, I don't know if you've heard it, but about how she's at a book signing and a man comes up to her with his wife is in the background. And he's like, hey, why don't you write books for men? And she's like, oh, I don't deal with men. And he's like, well, isn't that convenient? And he's like looking at his partner and his daughters are back there. He's like, they would rather see me like die than like fall off my horse. He's like, you talk about vulnerability for women, but like women don't want to see male vulnerability. So I was talking about this with another friend that was over. My partner was like, it's true. He's like, I don't feel like supported by women when I show vulnerability. I think it freaks them out too much. So part of this is like, we have this culture of like this toxic masculinity where like men are not allowed to show, like you're saying, like, I made a mistake, I'm messing up, I'm scared, I don't know what to do right now, that we want them to be like, okay, totally strong and heroic and loop in on your horse. And it's, and I'm not saying this is always true. I'm doing some like sweeping generalizations here, but I think that the root of where the male self-care is having a hard time is that men don't spend a lot of time together in vulnerable ways. Like I know a lot of men get together and drink with their friends, but like I think when you're drinking is a way of kind of numbing maybe a little bit of that connection, like they're not getting that. And I think that men are kind of taught that they don't need to do it because they've already kind of arrived. And there isn't really a huge market for it, but maybe that's changing. Mm-hmm. So I think as women and our partners, I think we need to support their vulnerability and like letting them know, like, I'm with you and I see when you need to fall apart, like come to me and do that. Or like, I will support you in finding a therapist, like, just encouraging that. And when it does happen, to not to like really check yourself when you start to feel that fear of like, oh, this shouldn't be happening, to be like, no, this is strength. Because that's the thing we need to see in ourselves. And we're feeling that I'm falling apart. I don't know which way is up. Like we think that's weakness, but it's actually strength. And I think that's the revolution right now, is transforming that.
That's incredible. And I mean, as you're saying this, I can identify with, if I see my husband getting upset about something, immediately, like, I guess I get really empathetic. I get upset too. I'm like, and so he has to shift, because that's his, I mean, and part of it is the role they put on themselves, but it's also culturally, like, if the woman's upset, then I need to kind of be the one to take care. I can't be upset too. So it's really interesting. Like, how can we be strong for them too? Like, yeah.
Which I think is actually like a lot of what we need too, that it's not, we're just doing this for them, but to see like another really deep layer of self-care is just resilience that I see, of like how, when I'm feeling so overwhelmed by things, and I want my partner to save me, you know, I want my partner to become my parents who weren't there for me.
Oh my gosh.
Like so tender and like hard to admit, but like if that's what I want in those moments when I'm feeling that like inner child stuff, and it's like, it's not that I can't ask him for help, but I need to do it from like a place of like, I'm autonomous over my own being, and I'm not just going to fall apart at your feet and expect you to pick up the pieces. But like, this is actually, I need you to like sit there and listen and hold my hand right now. Or I need you to like watch the baby, and I'm going to go be with my girlfriends tonight. Like whatever it is that I need in that moment, I need to be able to advocate for that and find that strength. And I just, in this past year of motherhood, you know, the first year is like,
yeah, you don't know which way is up half the time. It's, self-care sometimes looks, I mean, to me, sometimes my self-care is like, okay, she just took a bath. Will you go like get her dressed for bed? I'm going to get in her bath water and just sit in it for a minute and just kind of like do nothing. I mean, literally, I've done it probably 5 or 6 times.
I love that.
You just need a moment. You just need a moment. And it's, I think too, and maybe you can speak to this, a lot of people, when I start even mentioning the word self-care, they think, like you're saying, like I need to get away for a month, or I find though that we could usually implement some kind of self-care in our daily routine, like you're talking about the habits and things. Mm-hmm. Do you find that people come in wanting that big overhaul, and you have to teach them like, no, you can get self-care a lot easier than that?
Yes, this is the basis of like all the work I do, because people come in, they want their biggest loser moment. That's what I call it. Like,
okay, I teach people, I do like the weight loss thing, 100%, like literally biggest loser. I'm like, do you know how many times people gain weight back?
Yeah, exactly. Like it's not sustainable. It's dramatic. It's sexy. It's like, everyone's going to look at you. Everything's different. And I really attribute so much of this to the work of Janine Ross. I don't know if you've read any of her books about women and spirituality and body image, but she's like, you know, you lose the weight and you still have all the problems. And actually the problems you feel them more because you don't have to worry about the weight as much. It's like you've put the weight as like a way of numbing of that worrying about it with food and eating. But it's learning how to like make some small changes. And like, I think that's what cuts through the perfectionism is like, all right, like what can I do today? And that's really where I start all of my work with people is like, can we embrace like a smaller change and reward ourselves for that? Because we're never going to get it done. Even if you have your biggest loser moment, you gain the weight back. And that book, After the Exits of the Laundry, it's like nothing stays, nothing's permanent. But how do you recognize that you also have to do that inner work of like, again, you don't need to change anything. And like that there's something in you that is beautiful and resilient and powerful that like is totally intact. Like you don't even need to like fix it and it's there, but it's just about creating intentionality and space. And like, and I think those little habits, they create that for ourselves. Even if it's like, I'm going to take like, you're like 5 minutes in the bathwater. I love that. I'm going to do that.
It's great, by the way. If you have young kids, it's so great because you're already given them a bath.
Yeah.
You know, it's very environmentally friendly. I don't know, just whatever.
Totally. Yeah. I'm like, just those after bath moments too are always like the transitions are so stressful. Like you handle that. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's like asking for what we need. And then like actually following through in the smallest possible way. But it's not, I think these little habit changes, they're effective in self-care, but like I'm writing a book based on that. Like I've written a book based on small, like I'm just going to open my computer and do what I can because that perfectionist, like you can't do this. I call it can I cuss on here?
Sure.
Okay. The shit voice in your head. It's like, it'll just come in and tell you like, you don't have enough time. You can't do it. You need to go on retreat. You're never going to get it done. And so it's like learning to recognize that it's a defense of like, I'm scared to change. And so just recognizing those are my defenses and like, what can I do to just be that like kind, nurturing, like advocate for myself and just sit in the bath water or breathe.
Awesome. Gosh, so much good. I could just like listen to you forever. You've got such good stuff. But I want to know now about your personal self-care. Like what do you do every day? What does your self-care look like?
Well, this has changed a lot in the past couple of years. I submitted my morning routine to that website, My Morning Routine, and I before I was a mom, and I like went back and read it the other day. I was like, oh my gosh, like wake up and drink hot lemon water and do 20 minutes of yoga and sit and meditate and journal and like all this stuff. Now that's obviously not happening.
And then what did we do with all of our time back then? That's what I want to know.
Seriously,
you give me 10 minutes, I can get so much done now.
Oh, I know. Yeah, the pressure of time is like a pretty amazing thing.
Mm-hmm.
But I do have my things that I do. I always say that the secret of motherhood that I found so far is just systems. And so it's like everybody knowing what they need to do. So my partner and I switch off mornings, and we know which mornings those are to get up with Jonah, our son. And one of us will give him his bottle. The other one can like take an hour in the morning to maybe sleep in. Or if I don't need to sleep, I'll do some stretching, write in my journal, pick a few tarot cards, like kind of whatever it is I need. I know that like every other morning, at least, I'm going to get like a concentrated time. And then both those other mornings, I'll take 5 minutes to just, write down a few affirmations or do some gratitude or something like that. But making sure I get some moment to just ground and center, especially in gratitude in the morning, is important. 3 meals a day. This is like very non-negotiable for me. And I think it's the secret of a lot of things, but like, even when I'm busy and overwhelmed, like I will find a way to get a meal with as many plant products in it as I possibly can. And I will sit in a relatively calm place when my son is next to me in his high chair. It's not always so calm, but it works. And I get nourished in that way. So 3 meals a day, and then in bed by 10 o'clock, preferably 9:30.
Very cool. I love it. And I teach that. I teach the idea of having, and I don't call them systems, I call them routines, but same thing. Because I feel like, and that's the key to behavior change. I mean, it really is at the end of the day. Maybe not, we're talking self-care too, but I feel like anytime you're trying to change your life, that's where it's got to start, is in your life.
Yeah. Well, to me, it's the nervous system. It's like we're habitual creatures. Like we're just like animals are. Right? We are animals, but it's like we have habits, even if they're not positive, fulfilling habits. Like if you get up and look at Facebook for 20 minutes in the morning, like that's a habit, and you do it because on some level it feels safe. So it's like recognizing like we're doing habits anyways, like why not change those to habits that actually give me energy?
Love it. Absolutely. So this has been just Wonderful. I have loved every moment. Before we go, though, is there something that you wanted to share? Of course, I'm going to ask you to share where we can find you, but is there anything else, if there's just something that's, on your heart to share with us?
Yes, thank you. It's been so great. As I said, I love talking about this because I think one thing I want to share is that where the beauty of this work is really in community and in conversation. I think we think of self-care as this really personal thing we have to do, almost private. And the more, I mean, of course, you're going to do some of your habits privately, but the more we can create a community around habits and affirming ourselves and supporting each other in self-care, and that can be your girlfriends when you go out and have a glass of wine, like bring up self-care and start to create a dialogue around that, or be willing to risk some vulnerability. It can be at your place of work, of like really standing in your self-care and letting people know why you're doing it. I think a lot of us are very scared to do that. But especially if you are an influencer, like a manager, somebody like you, because it's the self-care, it rolls downhill is what I say. Like if you take care of yourself and set healthy limits and refuse to answer emails after 7 o'clock at night, like all of those things, like the people underneath you are going to receive those benefits. And I think we need to create like a revolution in these ways. And part of that is our own commitment to self-care and to like create a community in that. And then the last thing is that the more that I do this work, and you're talking about like 10 years ago, you saw it differently. And 10 years ago, I saw yoga as this escape from personal pain. And as I evolve with it, and especially what's happening in our climate, like I really see that like self-care is the place where we can really meet and care for other people, especially vulnerable populations. And to not turn away from self-care if our heart is hurting when we watch the news, then to know that like if we just keep following our self-care and showing up in the ways that we can and seeing that as a form of self-care, that I think that those two movements coming together of like care for all and care for ourselves are interconnected, and like knowing that we can really serve the whole by serving ourselves and vice versa.
Awesome. So where can we find out more? I know you have a blog, Selfcare with Gracy, right?
Selfcare with Gracy, and that's GRACY.com. Mm-hmm. And I also have a Facebook feed where I post every week about self-care thoughts that are on my mind, and I'm on Instagram. Also, I am starting, as I said, I'm transitioning my business model. So I've been doing these like higher price, small group coaching models, which has been, again, wonderful. And it didn't really work for me as a mother. And I really was feeling a hunger to create something new. So I'm starting a membership program where it's about that intersection of caring for the whole and caring for ourselves. It's called the Beautiful Life Collective. And that's going to start October 1st. So if it's going to be very affordable and accessible, and it's about creating a bigger movement and like having a place where you can dip into those resources. So that's going to start October 1st, and you can find out information about that on my website. Oh, and I have a podcast, Selfcare with Gracy. You can just search for it in iTunes.
Awesome. Thank you so much for your time. And this has been so enjoyable.
Oh, thanks, Gretchen. I really enjoyed it too. And appreciate you sharing your messages out. Needed.
Awesome. Well, that was just wonderful. I had such a good time talking with Gracy, and remember to visit her site. It is Selfcare with Gracy, and it's GRACY. She's got lots of things coming down the funnel to you guys that you can use if self-care is something that you want to explore a little bit more about. And of course, you can always visit me and get more information about what I'm doing at GretchenGegg.com. Thanks again for listening. And, forget about all that crud in your past. Turn around, turn your face forward, and just walk in that direction, you guys, because you deserve it. So keep facing forward. It's been a wonderful chat.